there. So today we're going to be talking about field trips and kind of thinking about the effect that they may have on high school education. If you want to take a look at that first slide we have for you here, it's a little bit of an introduction to the proposal. So children are encouraged to learn and begin framing the world through experiences and exposure. When primary students enter the education system, they participate in a multitude of themed learning days and field trips, as student-centered, experience-based learning is highly regarded as an effective teaching method, and it's encouraged amongst fellow education professionals. So thinking back to prior, when you were in preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, you went on field trips, you had specific themed days throughout the year. It was engaging, it was enriching. Those are kind of things that you think of with elementary education. But then as you enter high school, there's little to no field trips provided by the school or the district. And then with the lack of engaging and enriching field trips at the secondary level, students aren't being afforded the opportunity to utilize their critical thinking skills and make higher order cognitive connections between lesson material and real life circumstances. So thinking back to those, primary school examples, for example, you're learning about something in science, you go to the science museum, you connect those two things together, that kind of sticks with you and you remember that forever because you had that hands-on experience that went, with that class material. That's not really something that's as present now in, the secondary level. So they're not really given that same opportunity. If you want to go ahead and look at that next slide, we're going to jump right in then to our research question. So then what we're proposing to study with this study is, do content-related field trips have significant impact on student interest, motivation, engagement, and higher order cognitive skills? So that's going to be the overall research question. And then, so the purpose of the study is to determine if subject, content, adjacent field trips at the high school level have significant effect on student interest, motivation, engagement, academic achievement surrounding the specific subject. So we're really trying to look to see if, I'm teaching a class, teaching a subject, teacher takes the students on a field trip related to what they were just learning in class. Are students more engaged, more interested, more engaged? Are they remembering things? Are they able to make connections better due to that field trip? Like, does that field trip have enough impact to justify the cost and the preparation and whatnot that goes into a teacher having to plan a field trip? And so then the impact of this study would be recommendations being made to include field trips in school budgets, making appropriate teacher training so that teachers feel prepared to take students off campus, and how to properly integrate trips into their academic year plan, and requiring a designated number of trips per academic calendar year. If you want to go ahead and flip to that next slide, we're going to get into a little bit of kind of related literature about the topic, a couple different articles I have here. So the first one is a review of research on school field trips and their value in education. That just kind of starts us off by defining what a field trip is. So this article goes ahead to define a field trip as a class excursion with educational intent with the purpose of providing firsthand experience to stimulate interest and motivation, to add relevance to learning and interrelationships, to strengthen observation and perception skills, and to promote personal development. So I think it's really important off the bat to really identify what we're defining as a field trip, because oftentimes you do see at the high school level, students are touring campuses. So oftentimes there's a couple different local campus tours offered throughout the school year, and they're advertised as field trips, but that's not what we're talking about. That's not falling under this category. So we're specifically looking at trips that have educational intent, to provide experiences to stimulate learning. Then moving on to another source, it's called Expanding the Boundaries of Learning. This kind of dives in a little bit to the concept of making what these extracurricular considered activities part of the curriculum. So that research, it says, although, field trips can be defined as extracurricular, the activities support a holistic student-centered learning approach and play a central role in providing opportunities for students to use higher order thinking and make connections between experiences and learning material. So this is something that was just touched on a little bit, we're seeing in current research the importance of student-centered learning. And this kind of backs up that idea that these extracurricular field trips should be curricular. They should be in the curriculum. Looking at the next source is examining the effects of field trips on science identity. So this is actually a study that kind of, aligns with the research. So there was a 2015 study that examined 151 public school students in the United States. And they were taken to a science museum, and then students were able to explore the museum, participate in interactive activities, and interview practicing scientists. And the study ended up concluding that the experiences that took place on the field trip, with a specific emphasis actually on the interview portion, positively impacted student interest in science and their attitude towards science professionals. So this is kind of an interesting idea to touch on as well, thinking about like the importance of this research. High school students are about to be asked to make some really important decisions regarding, do I want to pursue something academically and professionally in the next few years? We're asking a lot of these students, and a lot of them haven't really had any interactions with a lot of the professions that they're going to consider going into. And so maybe if students had the opportunity to have some more like engaging and interactive hands-on experiences, they'd be a little more interested in certain topics that they might not have previously been interested in. So that's just something to note as well. And then continuing on, another journal we have here is called The Education Value of Field Trips. This was a study in Northwest Arkansas where a test group of students were taken on a field trip to the Crystal Bridges Art Museum. So they were given a tour. There was a bunch of different paintings. They were given facts about the paintings. And so 3 weeks after the field trip, the test group of students were administered a test. So they were tested kind of on their knowledge of art, historical empathy, tolerance, critical thinking, and sustained interest. So knowledge of art was given through a test. Historical empathy and tolerance were surveys. Critical thinking was through a free response, and sustained interest was actually kind of interesting. So sustained interest, they went ahead and gave all the students a free pass to take their families to the museum. And then they tracked how many students actually used that pass at a later date. But within all of the categories, the test group demonstrated a positive trend. And then additionally, there's another journal here called Evaluating the Impacts of a Wetland Field Trip, a case study with urban middle school students. So there was a research study that followed 26 urban students who were taken on a field trip to a wetland and exposed to water conservation techniques. And so it's reported that the students were not only engaged by the experience, but they found that the trip actually ended up having a significant impact on student perception of water use and personal conservation methods. So the students from this study are from an urban city, so wetlands are not something that they're used to. Water comes out of a tap for them, and it's there, it's instantaneous. So thinking about water conservation is something that they're not used to, because why would I need to conserve water? It's coming right out of the tap. But when you take them on the field trip, they're thinking deeper, because they're understanding, okay, I'm seeing this with my eyes. I'm kind of putting pieces together on how this water is getting to my tap. I'm seeing that there's an issue we need to conserve. I'm going to think more deeply about this, and I'm going to make changes. So that's this type of thinking that field trip had on these students. And then specifically with the study that I'm proposing, so there's 58 counties in California, and I'm proposing that we randomly generate 3 high schools from each of California's 58 counties to participate in the study. 1 English, science, math, history, and art class per randomly generated school will be selected as the test group. And then to establish the control group, essentially you will take the same subject taught by the same teacher, as it's high school, so they teach the same subjects throughout the day. So you'll just find the corresponding class at that point, and that will be the control group. And the thinking on that is that this method of establishing the control will alleviate biases and confounding variables surrounding the instructor's style of delivering content and teaching. We are testing for engagement, motivation, interest, in comparing them to a test group, control group who is not going to be going on the field trips. So by having the identical teachers with the identical subject, we're able to make sure that the teaching style is the same and it's not one teacher teaching the subject differently in a way that's resonating differently with the students. So we're just kind of trying to alleviate that there. Moving on specifically is a little more into the research design. So the study is designed to explore changes in interest, motivation, engagement, and cognitive abilities, and each of those four mentioned areas are going to be tested uniquely. So we're just going to go through those four really quick. So we're going to start with interest. So data will be collected through the use of surveys. Students in the test group will each receive a survey at the beginning of their corresponding unit, asking them to rate their interest level from 1 to 10. Students will then be administered a similar survey upon completion of the in-class unit and then again after their field trip experience. Data will be analyzed through qualitative measures. Data will be prepared and organized in two ways. Each student per test group will have individual data where increased survey scores will be noted, and then average increase will be calculated per group. Additionally, all students with a survey increase of 3 or more points will be separately organized and notated to signify significant increases. Moving on then is going to be motivation. So data will be collected through observation. Students will be observed in their respective groups during class weeks prior to the field trip, just so we can get a baseline behavior of all the students. They're then going to be observed, during in-class discussion with when the teacher is discussing the content that will be related to the field trip. And then also during the field trip. So behavior should be noted during each observational period. General behaviors of each student will be noted during the first observation, then changes of levels of participation, asking clarifying questions, engaging with other students, or increased levels of respect and ability to follow class rules should be noted throughout the second and third observation periods, as those are all factors we consider to be components of motivation. So those things should all be noted during those periods of observation. Data will then be analyzed qualitatively. Each student's behavior profile will initially be analyzed independently. Behavior profiles will be reviewed and positive changes will be noted. Those positive changes will be coded separately and used to create a percentage of students who demonstrated an increase in motivation. Moving on to that next slide there, we're going to touch on engagement for a little bit. So data will be collected in the form of a multiple choice question and behavior observation. Throughout the in-class unit, students will be administered sporadic singular question, true or false questions, and then correct answers will be noted. Students will also be administered sporadic true or false questions during the field trip. Correct answers will also be noted. Students will engage in a post-field trip mini lesson where they will also be administered true or false questions. So the idea behind this is the question should be simple to where if you just listen to what I said, you should be able to answer a true or false question. It's not anything high level. So with that, the data will be analyzed qualitatively. Data will be first organized to identify students who did not answer the original in-class question correctly. And then from those students who did not answer the question correctly, data will then be used to identify and notate which students then did answer the field trip questions or the post-field trip questions correctly. Moving on last is cognitive abilities. So data for this will be collected through the use of multiple choice tests and free response questions. Students in each subject's test group will be administered a multiple choice test as well as one higher order thinking free response question. Each control group will also be administered the corresponding examination. Scores will be reported and documented. Data will be analyzed qualitatively. To analyze qualitatively, test scores from each test group and control group will be notated and reviewed. Test scores from each corresponding test and control group will be compared to identify any differences in the control group scores, and differences will be notated. The responses to the free response question will be individually analyzed per student to identify students who were not able to use higher order thinking to properly answer the question. The number of students will be noted per test group and compared to the control group, and then comparisons will be noted. So in conclusion, this research has the potential to greatly affect the maximization of high school students' academic careers at the secondary level, as well as inspiring interest and excitement about future academic and professional pursuits. The goal of the education system is to adequately prepare students to enter society, but the lack of field trips and excursions take away from the school's ability to fully engage and inspire students, to the best of our abilities. And although educators are attempting to create engaging lesson plans and activities, students being able to step outside the classroom and begin to make connections and start framing how they see and interpret their world through those connections is something that just can't be done inside classroom walls. So that's why this research is important and this proposal is important. Thank you.